right. Welcome back, fellow druids. This episode, I'm going to talk about list building and specifically net lists. So this is a big debate a lot of times, right? And people kind of scoff sometimes. Oh, that's just somebody else's list, right? Or whose list is that? Or like, did you get that from the internet? And I think there's a lot less of that as time goes on. But I want to talk about so when I say net list, that means you went online, you found a list that somebody succeeded with at a tournament or played at a tournament and you liked, and you decided to take it for a spin. So a net list is a list you found on the net. Just, you know, that sounds obvious maybe now that I've said it, but in case there's any confusion. So first, just in case there is any of this still happening, do not feel negativity about taking a list that somebody else has played and playing it yourself. If it looks fun, play it. If it looks like it might be good, play it. If you just don't, there are people who play this game, and you, the viewer, maybe one of them, I'm one of them sometimes, who building a list is first of all, it's a very specific type of thought process, right? Playing the game is actually a very different thought process from list building. And then like list tweaking sort of lives in the middle there, right? Like you might see the shell of a list and go like, well, I like that, but I think if you change these 3 things, it's better, or I will play it better. So that we'll call that list tweaking for the sake of argument. So don't feel judgment, or if somebody does judge you, throw it back at them and be like, you know, I'm playing this list because I think it looks fun. I think it looks powerful. I think it looks good. I like it. I don't feel like being creative, right? That's all fine. And then sometimes good, right? Like, I may get into, there was some lists played over recently that I'm looking at, and that's sort of what spurred me to do this episode, that are close to some stuff that I was thinking about. And I want to give them a try because I want to see if it was just a one-off thing that somebody was able to succeed at, or if it's something that actually is very strong, or if it's something that I can play, or maybe it's something I start with and I go, well, this didn't quite make sense. I'm going to put my own spin on it, or maybe I'm just going to, you know, I'll play 2 games with it and be like, I don't like, you know, I'm not liking how this is feeling and where it's going, and we're just going to move on. These things may all happen. So that's what a net list is. That's the way you should approach net lists, right? I definitely don't think, so now let's talk about the cautionary pieces. Finding a list that was successful at an event will not win you games on its own. I'm going to repeat that for a second. A list that is powerful will not just win you games by you putting it on the table. This is not Magic the Gathering, where having the correct rock to somebody's scissors is going to win you a game, and if they have paper, you're screwed. There's a little bit of that in this game. There's certainly things that do counter things. There's certainly things that will have good matchups into certain things and bad matchups into other things. Most of the time, though, it's much closer to 50% than people think. There's exceptions, but you're not going to be able, even back in Mark II, when Haley II was at her utmost of absurd power, I can promise you that you couldn't just go, and I promise this because a number of players local to me did this, where they went and got Haley II and built her the way that somebody who won a tournament did, and then I smashed them because they had no idea what that list was supposed to do. And if I went to a tournament and played against the guy who came up with the list, or a very, you know, somebody who's played a lot of reps with Haley, whether I won or lost, the game was going to be much more difficult, right? So the point there is that the list is not going to win you the game. You need to understand the list. You need to understand how to play the list. That might mean watching videos or Watch Machine of somebody else who plays it and seeing what it does and why it's strong. It might just mean that you need to play the list and see how it works and what it does and how to work with it. And that's the strength of net lists, right? Again, you're taking out the I have to come up with the list on my own sort of problem. And that part's good, and it's going to give you an interesting thing. And the reason that list can be really good is it's going to maybe validate a thought that you had, right? So I've talked about on the show quite a bit, I call it hashtag Kruger Hill. That list was from Colin Hill, who now resides in Australia. He used to live in the United States for 3 or 4 years. And he created that list. I thought it looked fun, and I thought it looked like something that was totally different from what I was playing. At the time, I had been playing Wormwood a bunch. I had been playing some Kaya 2. I'm trying to think what else I was playing. I was just kind of coming off of Untu's nerf. I was playing Tanith a little bit at the time. That's about it. And I was looking at this and I was like, you know what? I think he's onto something, right? The Devourer's Host theme had just dropped. Not a lot of people were really trying it, so I really did I wanted to try it for that reason as well. And I see this list and I'm like, you know what? I think I see what Colin is onto, right? It's sort of a you need a certain threshold of a certain type of model to make them problematic, right? So dealing with 1 unit of Tharn Ravagers and like a unit of Bloodweavers is probably something most lists have the ability to do. But what about 2 units who are both no knockdown, tough, and defense 16? And what about 2 units of Bloodweavers along with them who have grievous wounds and are stealth and all these things? What if they just have enough of them that the opponent just can't do what they need to do? And then this list is also going to kill all sorts of different types of infantry, and mostly any like not super heavily armored colossals and heavy warjacks and things like that. And it's going to be strong into shooting. Even lists that shoot with jacks tend not to be the most tankiest of lists. But your defense is high, then you have tough, you have multiple wounds, you have stealth in some cases, you're speed 7, you throw reach out there. And it turns out the list is pretty good. And I don't know that I would have thought to build the list that way, to be totally honest. And I looked at it because it was different from what I was playing. I was like, you know what, I want to try something different. I want to see if this works. I've been having some trouble with some of these ranged armies. I've been having trouble trying to rely solely on my war beasts and my battle group. Let's see how this works. And honestly, I think I played, I don't know, somewhere between 15 and 25 games with that list, and I think I only lost like 2 or 3. And sometimes into matchups that just weren't great. Now, you know, I've been playing for a while. I don't necessarily want my skill level to be the only thing that evaluates this, but I've also picked up lists that played well with people and just done very poorly with them. There's a Mosner list that I tried a while back that on paper seemed like a really good idea, and I played it a handful of times, and it just did not. The list and me we didn't get along very well. So it's going to go a lot of different ways. But what it's going to do, hopefully, is take you out of your mindset, or sometimes maybe it'll validate something that you're doing, right? So don't let that be a problem. Like I've been looking at champions lists, and I've been thinking like, well, you know, one of the things that I might need to be able to do in my champions pairing is deal with some of these range pieces, and Sorcerer 1 in particular is kind of a problem because of she can be very linear. She can be very linear is not the right word. I'm not coming up with the word, but she has this problem of where if you can answer stationary and cold, she's very bad, and if you can't, sometimes you're very screwed. So I was like, you know what can't be made stationary are druids, because they can be immune to cold. And then things that are anti-range. So I was like, you know, Woldwrath plays pretty well with Baldur 1 out of the options that are available. He gets free charges, and Baldur can heal it. And Secret Masters is something that isn't explored very well. So maybe Druids there, right? I got the Woldwrath. It'll make their things more their force wind strikes, whatever they're called now, more accurate. Wold, you know, I can play in Secret Masters, and then, you know, and I didn't quite work it out. You know, I was like, maybe I'll do 2 Wardens and Megalith. That gives me a couple heavies and you know, some Druids, which give me some scenario play. They're hard to kill. They're pretty good against range. Baldur, who's got a pretty good denial feed. He's good at stopping range as well. If you can keep him behind a lot of clouds and a forest, keeps him relatively safe. You know, and this list can do. You've got the like the Rock of it, which is the Woldwrath, which can do really well. And that was a list that has sort of been floating around my mind. I haven't had a chance to play it. This past weekend, a player played a list similar to that, but different. He didn't have the other heavies. He just eschewed that and played the Woldwrath as the only heavy, which is interesting because Baldur can only can produce 6 Fury, and the Woldwrath only makes 4, and you need a transfer. But he instead went with Wrong-Eye and Snapjaw and I just freaking blanked. The Gatorman Boker and Swamp Shamblers. And the reason he did that, and I was already starting on the Shamblers, like, well, maybe I need them in there. Because my list didn't have any sack pawns, but the thing is, if I add sack pawns into the situation, right now my Druids have a hard time dying. Now I'm absolutely certain that I can keep Baldur safe as long as I position a few sack pawns correctly. And then Wrong-Eye was an interesting thing that I had not even really considered with this list, but what it means is now you have Druids of Orboros that have Prowl, so they can give themselves stealth. They are, which makes them defense 15 or 13, depending. That applies, their clouds can, depending on the range of the attack, make melee attacks also push them up to defense 15, but they're at least 13 there. They're immune to every element because of their attachment, and every single one. They're immune to blast damage because of Baldur, which that was already something I was considering. And they're immune to knockdown. And then on top of it, they put if I put Starcross behind them, now they're really hard to kill in melee. And even if you do get a ranged attack that that can ignore stealth and all these other things, I'm just like, oh, you killed this like half a point model. Great. The whole time my Woldwrath's shooting at you. The Druids are force bolding. Some of the Druids are force bolding at you. Things like that. We'll see. I'm going to give that list a try and see how it goes. So that's what you want to be looking at when. So that's the strength I was able to identify now. Once I put it on the table, we'll see. Maybe the way that plays won't suit my style, right? Because it's going to be a slow, patient list. And a lot of what I've been playing right now, I would say, has not been slow or patient. And that'll be good for me too. So sort of to wrap this up, when you're looking at a net list, try to evaluate what it does. Try to evaluate why you're playing it. Try to understand why the person who built it was playing it. Try to make sure you play it. This is true for any list, so I could probably have a list building episode that was about 5 seconds long and it said one thing, which is play every list at least really it should be 10 probably, but at least 5 times before you are certain that that list is bad. Maybe something's really apparent that it just doesn't quite work with the first, maybe there's a thing on paper that as soon as you play it, you're like, oh man, I didn't consider this. Tweak it or whatever, but for the most part, until you've played 5 games with something, you can't be certain that it's not functioning in the way that it needs to. So, the same is true with netlists. It might be doubly true with netlists. But don't feel any stigma about playing them, right? A lot of people have a lot of different investment with the game. If you only can get in, maybe 1 game a week, maybe 1 game every 2 weeks, and you just want to play a list that's fun and show up, and you see one online that's fun, play it. There should be no well, you can't play that because it's too good or too powerful. I don't subscribe to that personally. Show up, play the list, learn about it. Learn about the list. That's the thing. Keep in mind, the biggest takeaway about this is picking up a list that won a tournament does not mean you will win a tournament. It doesn't even mean that you'll win more games than you used to. So just keep that in mind as you're approaching a list, be it a net list or not. So real quick, just to counterpoint before we wrap up the episode, some negatives are going to be the more popular a list is. So if a net list starts showing up, the less surprises there's going to be, right? So that is the one downside to a net list, right? Is if it's a list that becomes popular enough, say Ghost Fleet for Crix, for example. That list was extremely popular. It was still very good, but people were preparing for it. So you need to know, while I'm playing Ghost Fleet, the problems magic weapons and RFP are really bad for me. And, when it was really early, people just flat weren't bringing enough of that, and they weren't winning those games. As time moved on, a lot of people started playing those lists, and suddenly a lot of those things show up in lists. So I'm going to use the Mark II example. There was a time when Trollbloods always played Runes of War and Elemental Evolution. You could count on, if you ran, and it was very popular, I would say, huge, especially in my area. And that was great because it meant I could just play Chromac 2, who was a very good answer to Trollbloods, and win games that I didn't have a great answer to with some of my other casters, right? So, like, you're like, I know you're coming with these lists. I know I can come with this list that's good into you and beat you. Or I know I can play this a certain way, right, and beat you. So that is the downside to Netlist. If you start playing something the more popular it becomes, the more people are going to be wanting to practice against it. They're going to be thinking about it. They're going to be trying to plan for it. So that's the one negative of Netlists. And then with the, where if you build your own list in your own way, it may not be expected, right? So there's drawbacks to each. I would definitely say don't, be a special snowflake if that's what makes this game enjoyable to you. But don't feel like just because you didn't innovate in a list that it means that you're not capable of winning games, or that you don't deserve to win games, or that the list won you the games, because you need to win the games. It's just the list having the pieces makes a lot of sense. And sometimes you just want to play it and see why it works, and like maybe that'll even tell you how to beat it. If like maybe it's for another faction or something. There's some lists that I've certainly thought about. Like Rasheth, we don't have anybody locally. I've kind of been like, I wonder if I could get a list together to try that, play 5 games with that, so I know how it works, so that when I play against it a circle, I know how to beat it. People are going to do stuff like that, so again, there's a downside. But, there's the other upside as well. So, but don't, and if you're not sure how the list works, don't start trying to make changes to it initially. If it's doing a very specific thing, right? Like, see why it's working and then make the change, I would say, more often. Unless you just know, like, I already had this idea, they had this idea, they're very close, but I think I like, if I tweak this and tweak that, yeah, try that too. Anyways, that's Netlists. How to use them, what to think about with them. As always, if you enjoy the episode or enjoy my content, please subscribe so that you don't miss any. Share us on social media. Feel free to hit up the Full Circle group on Facebook or on my Discord channel. They're both in the show notes. Sorry, the Full Circle Discord channel to be more specific. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.